Alright, I'm continuing to work on my second book, a deep game design dive into jumping and platforming, and it's time for another video to go along with this. And let me know if you guys want to see more of my research streams, where I'm trying to play some of the older platformers, especially from the SNES era. But continuing from our last one, we talked more about freeform versus committed jumping. For today's piece, I want to discuss a little bit more about obstacle design when it comes to platforms and jumping in general. So, when it comes to any kind of platforming based challenge, there's essentially three areas that you can add the challenge or make it an obstacle. You have where the player is jumping from, what they're doing in the air, and how they're landing. And each one of those three has different rules and different elements you can tweak to make it easier or harder. Starting from where the player lands, or where the player is jumping from. Being able to adjust or change that surface will greatly impact the actual jumping challenge. Probably some of the most famous examples of this would be the idea behind the slippery floors, where when the player starts moving, they're going to keep carrying that momentum, or bouncy jumps. Everybody loves bouncy jumps, right? When the platform just constantly pushes you up and down. And one of the reasons why adjusting where the player is jumping from makes things so much harder is that you're affecting that initial jump. When the player is trying to extrapolate where they're supposed to jump to or how far, and the ground is messing with that. Some other examples would be another famous challenge when the platform or the ground starts falling away, and have to keep moving and jumping to avoid it. Now, while you're in the air, obstacle designs are a little bit trickier, and this is where more free-form challenges or difficulty have really taken over. This is when you're supposed to maneuver your character in the air, usually making micro adjustments to avoid various impacts or obstacles. If you've watched anyone play some like the latest or most recent Kaizo hacks, you can see how much difficulty you can put into maneuvering. Such as if there's like a spike or a spike section, you have to like jump and get around kind of thing. And this can be very hard to do, and the difficulty of this comes into how you define the character's jumping ability. And we'll talk more about that probably in video 3. But there's also obstacles such as having enemies fly across the screen. You can have things moving along, and essentially the less space the player has to work with in order to survive is going to ultimately make that harder or easier. You can also go into these kinds of challenges with having the player either jump up or below obstacles, or even through them. That's another very difficult part. The player has to thread the needle between two different obstacles. That will usually require a very precise jump, and it's very easy to screw up, as we've seen again in Kaizo, Super Meat Boy, and so on. Now the final point, and one that's a little trickier to talk about, is how the player is landing. There isn't too much you can do in terms of landing, but the commonality that we see in terms of difficulty is that the less space the player has to land to or land on, the harder the overall jump's going to be. There's a reason why you have to be really careful in terms of difficulty if you design pixel wide or like the character's hitbox wide jumps, where even the slightest miscalculation, the player is going to either under or overshoot it. Because these will usually require careful planning by the player, and it can be very hard depending upon how the character controls in air. One of the platformers I played, this was last year I want to say, was this game where your character, when you jump, you can adjust their trajectory while they're in the air, but they will constantly keep moving or keeping that momentum. So you're trying to make micro adjustments, but at the same time, the character is moving along with you. So it's kind of like trying to navigate a shopping cart where one of the wheels broken and it just like lists to the left or right. But another part about this challenge is where the landing is in relation to the player's jump, or their maximum jump length. And the reason is that if you're going to make an easier jump, it should be pretty close to where the player's maximum jump length is, but still giving them enough leeway to undershoot it. Some of the hardest jumps in platforming is when the player has to make a leap, and let's say that this is the length that I can jump from start to finish, and you're going to put a jump right in the middle. Because the problem is that the player has to automatically stop their character in midair, but once you stop them, they immediately lose all their momentum. So if you mistime that, you can't really adjust yourself to get back into that or get back to the landing. Now, when it comes to kind of these landing-based challenges, again, some of the hardest we've ever seen are when you had to make those character-wide jumps. And we saw this in games as old as Mega Man, to even some stuff as old or as recent as Meat Boy and probably a lot of the Kaizo games. And there's just no real way of, I guess, streamlining it or making it easier for players. If you have to make a jump that's like this wide or land, you're going to be in trouble no matter how great you are as a platformer. But with that said, we're going to switch to some game footage. I think we're going to turn to a 3D game this time and talk about how difficult some obstacles can be when it comes to jumping. But first, a quick word to our Patreon supporters. And now a quick shout out to our supporters over on patreon.com/gwbicer. When it comes to challenging platforming, the Crash Bandicoot series, especially with the Insane Trilogy modifications, is a really good example of how difficult you can make a jump based on the various factors we've talked about. So this is one of the more infamous levels in Crash Bandicoot 1. It is the bridge, where the player must jump across these gaps while avoiding enemies like this annoying guy, and of course timing their jumps properly. And we even have a little slide right here to add further challenge. Now, we're going to talk more about probably 3D platforming in general in a later video if this series continues to be popular. But for what we're talking about now, Crash Bandicoot has, again, the difficulty in the three areas. You have landing-based challenges, such as when you must jump from a platform that's about to fall. You have trying to manipulate Crash so that he can jump in between gaps or in between broken platforms. And you have stuff that's going on in the air, such as knowing to dodge that guy. And you don't really see too many air-based challenges in Crash Bandicoot, which is very interesting from a platformer design. We normally see those kinds of difficulties when we look at 2D platforms, where the player is given a lot more of a field of view over the situation, and being able to adjust or micro-adjust the character accordingly. And what I think we're going to do is, I'm going to show a few more seconds of Crash Bandicoot. I'm going to actually fast forward a little bit, because I think this is a part where we died a whole lot in this game. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit further into this point. And I want to switch to some 2D platforming to show off kind of the difference in that challenge. But again, you can see him trying to maneuver things around. I'm going to use the magic of fast forward here to skip things along. There we go. But like right there, when you see trying to make a leap that is not near the character's max jump length, it is arguably harder than making a jump that's near the end of it, because you have to make those very careful micro adjustments. I think I was trying to go for something secret there, or I thought there was something secret there about why I jumped. But let's see if we can make it this time. Oh. But yeah, this is definitely one of the harder games. I'm going to fast forward another 5 seconds. See how many times you can die in this part. So we're back at this section again, and I'm going to try to make this leap. Again, it's very tight in terms of the length. There is a middle jump, and there was another one. But when it comes to like far or the maximum range jumping, you have to be careful about how tight you make that. Now here are a few of those middle jumps. And while we'll talk about this in a later video, keep note of how I'm using the shadow underneath Crash to time my jumping. But with that said, I'm going to switch the footage over one more time to some 2D play of a game, and we'll talk more about the air adjustments. When it comes to the 2D design in terms of obstacles, we see designers get a little bit more creative with what they're challenging the player to do. So this is a part where you're doing a very infamous and very technical challenge of wall jumping while trying to make micro adjustments in the air. And like we said, the idea behind micro adjustments is being able to adjust your character to duck and weave around certain obstacles. Many of the Kaizo-based games will we make use of these kinds of challenges. So you can see I'm trying to make it across, and it looks a lot, I think it looks harder, or it plays harder than it looks when it comes to these kinds of obstacles. And again, when you're asking the player to make these multiple adjustments, it comes back to a lot of the technical skill of playing a platformer. You're constantly have to read what's going on and figure out whether or not you've done things adequately. And you don't really have the time to make a micro adjustment if you mess up. Once you start to fail, you're kind of going to fail. And a lot of these platformers are built around almost like a committed challenge, where once you start, you can't necessarily change it. You're either going to succeed or you're going to fail. And I'm hoping that this is the point where I actually win, but I don't think so. But we'll begin to wrap things up here for this part. Oh, wait, did I make it? There we go. See, I was able to do it in the end. But we're going to wrap things up here for this part. So again, when it comes to designing obstacles and platformers, it's all about where the player's landing, what they're doing in the air, and then how they're actually going to stick that landing. And I think I may have butchered that. So it's from the ground to the air to the landing. And getting all those parts right, or being able to manipulate or adjust them, is where you're going to come up with a variety of platforming-based challenges. So for people watching this right now, can you think of some of your favorite or infamous platforming sections in games, whether they're 2D or 3D? But with that said, let me know if you guys want to see more of my little platforming research streams, and I will see everyone for another video. And if you'd like to get mentioned on our Patreon page, check out patreon.com/wplacer. But until next time, have a great night, and come back for daily discussions on game design. If you're looking for another book about game design, be sure to check out my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, out now. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.